You were called to order this meeting of the Strategic Housing Finance Corporation. Let's begin with a roll call and confirmation of
President Julio Gonzalez.
here.
Vice President Lisa Reeves. Director Nasa Chihuahua. Director Keisha Prince. Director Wilmer Roberts.
Here.
Director Dan Wynn. Here.
Forum.
Our first business is our public forum and citizen communication section. Ms. Hoffman, do we have anybody signed up to speak?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Guys, would you like to address the board?
Sure. Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is.
Oh, 1 second. We gotta do a little. We got a new 20.
There you go. I'll be the guinea pig.
Yep. Ready? Okay. 3 minutes.
All right. My name is Gus Villegas. I am with Infinite Capital Construction. I serve as the Director of Sales and Client Services. I'm also a past president of the Austin Apartment Association. Here on behalf of my employer, we've currently been doing work at Rosemont regarding the insurance flood damage from a couple of years ago that's kind of been outstanding. We believe that we've been doing the work in good faith and continue to do so. In fact, I think because of our relationship with Capstone, we continue to do what we need to in order to kind of make sure that you guys are able to operate successfully. I mean, there's some code violations that are in place that we're trying to address as well to kind of get over the phone. As a third-party operator, I cannot hold Capstone completely responsible and put the onus of payment on them, as I know that the board of directors and the ownership group directly has a large say in how funds are distributed and allocated. And that's kind of how I'm here. I'm hopeful that some of the items that are on the agenda today will address some of these past due amounts. I know it's not just us that in place. Currently, to date, we've done approximately $2.8 million in work. Currently outstanding, we're floating around 1.1. So we are due approximately 40% of the total work that we've done and continue to do over there. We do expect that number will probably stay the same as we're going to be taking small payments of what we're going to be discussing today. But we're looking for a little bit larger solution in terms of having to dip in the reserves to actually be able to collect upon the past due amounts that are in place. So again, I'm hoping that these are going to be addressed today at some point in time. I'm willing to take any questions that you guys may have for us or provide any documentation if need be as well.
Anybody have any questions? Okay, next speaker. Thank you.
Gabby, would you like to address the board?
Ready? Good morning. My name is Gabby Garcia. I'm an organizer with FOSTA, and I support the neighbors at Rosemont Tenants Association. Several tenants who had intended to be here last week were not able to make it today. Rosemont, along with many other communities in Austin, was without power for several days, and now they're in the middle of inspections. Foundation communities. They've asked me here to address 4 issues today. First of all, the late fees for February. Over that storm and the power outage, tenants had to make difficult decisions about how to use money that they carefully budget. To get out of the cold, many had to go to hotels. I mean, a lot of them had to spend money on fast food because they couldn't cook or heat their homes. And while these outages affected over 150,000 households in Austin, families on fixed incomes are hit hardest during this situation. The tenants at Rosemont would like SHFC to commit to waiving any late fees for this month. Late fees will only further complicate tenants' efforts to get back on their feet. The second thing I'd like to talk about is the ongoing security of the mailboxes. Last week, they were broken into again. These mailboxes were supposed to be temporarily located in the old leasing office. And it's been over a year, and if those of you who have been there have seen that they're haphazardly placed on tables in an unlocked room where we've literally been waiting for somebody to come and pick them up and take them. Tenants have complained over and over again that these doors are left open at night, and it's no surprise that they were vandalized. I have pictures here. Some of you may have gotten things from tenants as well. Tenants rely on mail service to get important documents like checks, benefits, and other things that directly impact the quality of their lives. Finally, the conservice bills. The issue of the bills has been a recurring theme that's never fully addressed, despite the amount of time that we bring it up to SHFC and the capstone. The tenants who receive these bills fall into two categories. One, tenants who were billed for electricity when they weren't living in their apartment because they were relocated. And two, tenants who were never relocated, never shut off their Austin energy bill and are being double billed by Capstone. I want to give an example of one tenant, April Combs, who stayed during the renovations, never turned off her light, and in September of 2022, she started receiving bills from Capstone. She advocated for herself, went back and forth with the company, and got them to admit that they misbilled her. They credited Rosemont because Rosemont is the one who the false bill should go to, in the amount of over, it was like $1,100. For some unknown reason, on April's ledger, they didn't fully credit that, and so now, in February, she's showing that she owes money. It's saying that she's late. And also on her ledger, it shows her apartment is empty. So Conservice is going to keep billing her for this apartment that they think is empty. Finally, and I have those papers here. Finally, the transition. Last time we talked about tenants unease at, I'm gonna run out of time, but basically we're asking Patrick to hold Capstone accountable. They're not doing the job that they need to be doing, and we need to make sure that this transition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you tell us what unit, tenant April is and what this number going to be?
Yes, it's, I have all the things for you here. It's 30028.
30028 and
Collins Street.
and you received the like those again that most recently went.
I have all of the bills for you here, so I think the last one that she got. Was in November last year. And she hasn't gotten any, I think, for January, but you could see on her ledger that they're still listing her apartment as vacant, so she's waiting for it to come.
And she has never been there.
She stayed there the whole time, paying Austin electric.
Christine, some of the items. Yesterday. Yes, Anika, who is the next speaker?
That's it.
That's that. Okay.
Concern
Yes, sir.
with regards to the security, what are they doing with these boxes to get it open into? It sounds like at night, and that's when you intend to be there at night.
So, yeah, so Dally, Ward is here. I had asked him specifically to talk about the issue with the mailboxes and potentially options for how we move forward. Obviously, it's been a recurring issue, not germane to Rosemont, but obviously that's our property and we're concerned about it. So I asked him if he could sort of explain kind of how we got here, you know, and what we can do to try to figure out the best way to address it, despite, you know, maybe the monetary implications and such. So if I could allow him to do that, or we would like, I mean, obviously the time concern, but he is here and he can address the issue related to the property. But we do have security on site. I mean, obviously they roam the property and the building is secure, but people do prop the office open, which is a concern not only for the mail, right? Because
people can't get in, and that's a lot of times what happens. And if you're talking about criminal activity, they're not following the rules. So I mean, that's what happens. So if you'd like, maybe briefly.
Or would you like to have the property management discussion now, or do you want to?
Do it later. The only point I'm trying to get to is if they're not being effective, they we need to get rid of the security. Because that's at nighttime, that's when those vandalism.
Sure, and if you know their pattern, you can decide to play in accordingly, you know what I mean, in terms of any roving patrol. But again, we have some thoughts about maybe beefing that up or how we want to do that, but they are on site and we can talk about it.
We will talk about it today.
Okay.
For now, let's keep with the structure of the agenda. That closes the public forum citizen communication portion. I am now on consent agenda, and without objection, I move for unanimous consent. Item approval of the minutes from the December 19th, 2022 special meeting, as well as approval of the minutes from the January 5th, 2023 annual. Is there any objection? Okay, all those in favor of approval of minutes, please say aye. Aye. Now on to item number 4 on the agenda. Yes, ma'am.
Who made the motion?
I made the motion.
Okay, and who second?
So I move without objection. I'll change it and we'll talk about it with that. Will somebody make a motion to move the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes.
And you seconded, Ms. Prince? All those in favor? Aye. Let's go to item number 4, discussion items, and remember that our target time for board business today is 90 minutes. And we have I've allocated 50 minutes for this portion. The first item will be Rosemont Sales milestones. We are looking for a quick presentation. and
Sure.
Clarifying questions.
Sure, and our attorney is online. So Naaman Howell is our, counsel. Chris Sayers is the specific attorney working with with Foundation Communities legal counsel as well, to sort of iron out all the details of the due diligence items. But here's a sort of a brief overview. Rosemont, next steps, next slide. This background, we obviously selected Foundation Communities, had discussions that led to a January meeting where we discussed some of the outstanding items and the goal of sort of getting this thing closed. Next slide. So essentially, right now the process is, and I probably should put it February, but right now Foundation Communities is doing their due diligence. They believe that process will take up to 60 days, obviously, to figure out what the actual estimate needs to be, so that the funding that they've secured from or have committed from the city of Austin will obviously be close to what it needs to be in terms of a figure. The draft agreement has been circulated amongst the attorneys. They're working on finalizing these final terms, and we'll be able to meet soon to discuss that. So ideally, that'll happen in March, or at least by the beginning of March. The due diligence may still continue as it relates to the inspection of the properties, as was mentioned earlier. That process is ongoing. And then obviously most of the necessary approvals have to do with primarily the securing of the city funding, the due diligence with TDHCA because it's a tax credit property, and all those things associated with that. But most of those are legal in nature, so no one has to worry. Nothing we're asking you to do. But most of that has to do with more of the legal items. As was mentioned, there's some liens that are outstanding. When we talk about the financial stabilization plan, we have a plan for how those get addressed. So those we will have resolved prior to the closing, and we have a plan with the idea of ideally closing in June. The only thing that would inhibit that would be maybe TDHCA's approval, which if anybody's worked with TDHCA knows that they oftentimes have their own timeline for things, but we obviously everyone's interested in that moving forward. They have been they are involved in this process, but we hope that will continue to move forward in a timely fashion. So with that, I'm going to just brief by exception and allow for questions.
Yes, sir. Mr. Roberts.
My concern is that we've been dealing with this process for now almost over 6 months. And we awarded the bid on the 19th. And here we are. And here they had 60 days worth of due diligence at that time. And at this point, pushing this thing off to June to close is costing us money every month. And I believe somewhere in the neighborhood of about $300,000 a month. All right, Susan? So each month that we delay this is costing money. I believe Foundation's community needs to step up their plate and write a check and let's close this down.
Is it my understanding, that foundation, that, community, are they still waiting for additional funds for the actual field? Either way? Is that my understanding?
Yes, ma'am. So as you might recall from the packet, they're getting 26 million from NeighborWorks. And then the balance of the 36,010,000 is coming from the city of Austin or Austin Housing Finance Corporation. They're also getting funds for rehab from the city as well. So the due diligence really didn't start till after our meeting with the councils, really, in January. So the meeting, it happened the day after our January board meeting. So I think it was January the 6th. We met, actually met the same day as the meeting. I'm sorry, January the 5th. It was the afternoon of January 5th we met. And we discussed, and so obviously there was no document to date because we had not discussed the terms. We were more exchanging information about who was going to be representing them and the like. So the process for due diligence really probably started, let's say conservatively, maybe a week and a half after or so. So they're pretty much still within that. They said they needed at least 60 days because they were visiting every single unit, and obviously the number needed to be fairly close, very accurate for the city of Austin because I'm Chicago public dollars. So they're probably right on schedule as we see it. Obviously, we would like to get this done sooner versus later, but they, the release of the funds, most of it's municipal or tax dollars, so most of it won't just be released until there's some items that need to get taken care of. But we are on task, to be honest.
But the funds are finalized, that they are going to be.
Well, we got the letters of intent, so that assumption is they will follow, that will happen. I mean, we don't foresee it being a problem, but I mean, we don't think there will be a problem.
Point I'm making here is that between now and June, that's an extra $1 million there to the highway expense. And so that's where I have issues. Typically, when you bid a thing, you close it within 60 days of bid.
Yeah, the source of funds, well, unfortunately, the source of funds doesn't really allow for that. I'm just being honest about what the source of the funds. You're talking about, city process that requires multiple steps. So
we went with the corporation on the bid, not the city. So that's the point. I mean, the foundation community is the one that did it.
That's correct.
Said they did it, and they're not living up to their.
Well, I don't feel like the way I see it is that, according to the matrix that was designed, what was important to them was, it wasn't how fast they can have the funds or the funds were actually getting. So this is going to delay and cause more anguish for the residents because this wasn't a priority on the matrix. It was just other things.
Can I just extract from what you said, Mr. Howard, that currently is no delay notable on the side of the budget, is that correct?
I'm not sure if those are right words, but I mean, what I'm saying is we're on schedule. Based on the discussion we have with foundation communities, I think what I'm hearing is an expression of it being quick sooner. Obviously, they share with us what they're being bound by in terms of funding. And they're on schedule according to what they are sharing with us is required for them to get the funding. Now, that wasn't a component of the evaluation in terms of our assessment, in terms of the expeditionary carrying out of the closing, right? So once we were in discussions with them, obviously they made us aware of the length of time and how involved that would be. And so I think it's in everyone's interest to actually get it done sooner, but again, we didn't put a maximum date for closing on the, in the document. So
Ask our council alert us if it is perceived delays or.
oh, certainly.
Maybe get it that way rather than anxious that this inherently is going to be delayed, like get actual concrete milestones, whether we.
Absolutely.
That'd be helpful. Also, I just want to remind us all that we were trying to stay on mission with maximum affordability, and that was one of the charges of this body, is to make sure that we stay within the goal of deep and durable affordable housing for Travis County residents, and that became the prevailing.
While it is the prevailing criteria for this particular project, we also have a mission to provide more. So the more that this project is delayed and the more money that is spent, trying to get this process completed, this is stopping us for providing for the second largest growing city in America with more people that's going to need affordable housing.
Which is why I think it would be helpful to have, red flags if we're having delays. If we could get that from council, I totally endorse what. We want to make this efficient and we want to stay on mission. We could get information, because it's hard for us to get.
Right, and what I'm saying, suggesting to you is we're very early in the process. To be honest, until the due diligence is complete, the city won't be looking at any numbers related to the project. I'm just being completely transparent. The city is doing due diligence to figure out what's needed for the immediate rehab. And so they won't speculate about sort of all the closing evidentiary documents until that time. So we're in that phase currently. I mean, so as it relates to that phase, there is no delay. But I certainly, if there are any perceived or what appears to be a delay, then I will let the board know. Additionally, what I can make sure that I communicate with the councils is that we want to keep moving this along and try to encourage that process. But again, because of the nature of who we're dealing with, there's a lot of players, and that doesn't necessarily, you're talking about city council and other members. So, I mean, we will do our best to try to make sure that we can encourage that. But well, I mean, it's not something that we necessarily are going to be able to control.
I think,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just said, all of the people that did it was committed to making it
Sure.
affordable for whatever amount of time that it was, 99 years. And it's just that, if you don't have the money, we need to be looking at other alternatives. That's all.
Would it be helpful to have council?
He's on the line, but I mean, again, we're probably not at that stage yet. I mean, but I certainly, we will keep you engaged. We will keep you informed.
The goal of this item was to get something like that, to make sure that they're. They are. We will hear repeated presentations.
That's correct. Every month you'll hear.
If one of the committees wants to take on work to flesh out additional sub items that would be useful. In addition, in terms of new business, we'll put sort of communication flow to the local governments that have some of the necessary funding streams. And I would be very eager to hear any item for action on how to formalize a request for a state out. I don't know if it would have the support of the full body, but that is why it's good to kind of craft the items for action. Barring any additional questions for discussion, I think we're ready to move on to implement weather policy. All right, implement weather policy. Again, this is a short presentation with some
Sure.
clarifying Q&A.
So we actually have copies for you there in front of you, and of course we have it on the screen. So Okay, so I'm gonna, and I know you've all read this, so I'm gonna go word for word. The basic framework and structure of these policies are rooted squarely in what gets produced by Texas Apartment Association. And I'm sure you all are familiar with their role and responsibility. So most of what they've developed over the course of the years is to protect the interests of the resident, obviously. And so what we've done is essentially use that as a sort of the basic foundation for this policy, with the idea of adding those things that you all have sort of identified as priorities. So having said that, we have just an introduction of, what an inclement weather event is, basically need to be defined. And then we go to what typically would happen in the case of an event, those steps that you would take prior to an event occurring, which falls squarely within the responsibility of the property management company, communicating items to us as far as information goes related to the event. And just as a note, we obviously had what would be deemed as a severe weather event or inclement weather event last week. And we generally use this framework to sort of do reports. But what would happen was there would be, let's see, is it on the next slide? No, the reports. Okay. Sorry. Go back to the first, go back to the slide. Okay, so let me just go through this. Notices will be sent out to residents, explaining what their responsibilities are and encouraging them obviously to take necessary steps. And again, this is generally things that are espoused through the TAA and others. So it talks about the type of notices, the information, and of course, this is draft, so we could obviously expand on this. But these are the things that we are asking folks to do in the notification prior to the event. We don't say what the time frame is prior to the event, and that's, so there's things that we realize maybe weren't added, but I mean, certainly we can continue to talk about this. So next one would be after the notices. Well, further explanation of the notices, talking about, what things should be contained within. So let me put it in the next one. We did say, I'm sorry, no, sorry, let me go back. Okay, so actually we did have time. We said it no less than 24 hours ahead of the anticipated emergency. Sorry, I thought it was the enforcement. And then the staff will make every effort to notify the residents in advance as possible, as far as possible. So 24 hours would be the minimum, as far as setting a time frame for notices. And then we would obviously have those translated into English and Spanish. And then the responsibility of the property management company would be to make sure that they do their preventive checks and balances to ensure that we are prepared for the event. And then we talked about the idea of having the ability to communicate information. One of the things that we found that was kind of frustrating for most folks is that they would call in many cases and probably would hang up because they got an emergency number, because it wasn't, it's a system, right? And that you pay for, and in some cases you may not get a live person. You may get the recording that suggests that you leave a message, and then that information is communicated to the maintenance staff, who would then obviously act accordingly. But we would try to figure out, I mean, our thought was that we would ensure that a live person would answer that, which would probably mean we would need to look at other systems other than the one we currently use for that purpose, because most of them, there are some that do that, but it would be a different construct. And then, so we were saying that in most cases, obviously property management companies will have a standard policies, which typically are TAA, but some of them have others. But this policy obviously would go beyond that. It would supersede any sort of rudimentary or routine things that are done, if in fact what we're asking for exceeds what they typically would do. So obviously, again, there'd be some discussion prior to figure out if the correct measures that are planned for. That would be a discussion that would happen ahead of time. Maybe it involves a board. In fact, I was just talking to the CEO of HACA, and they have what they call an emergency response team, which would be a couple members of the board and the staff. And whenever there's a severe weather event, they all sort of get together and talk about the event to make sure that they are considering all the likes of what potentially may be. And that's just kind of late breaking for me, because I was just talking to them this morning. I thought, oh, maybe we should put that in the policy. But the idea that you have, getting the input of all the, stakeholders, including the leadership, possibly in some decision making related to the severe weather event. So that may be something we want to add. And then the report, we said asset manager, him or other members of the staff, let's just say the staff will make sure that we get the information to me, and then that report will be distributed. Again, we sort of had a test run of this for good or bad. We don't want a severe weather event to occur, but we had one this past week, and we did formulate what sort of the makeshift sort of daily report to sort of identify issues related to the event. In most cases, this current event was primarily related to the power outages and the damage to trees. There was no significant damage to property per se, but a report that would be a roll-up that would be coming to you all daily would be something that would be part of this process. And then we would review that process each year, if not more frequently, to ensure that we're addressing the needs of the organization and of the people that we serve. So that's it in a nutshell. Right.
Thank you so much. I really found the draft inclement weather report really useful. It's so really got the daily updates, the Rosemont's power restored, and seeing the incremental information. I thought it was really helpful. The intent of having this presentation is for folks to ask clarification questions. I think our general policy development process would be ask staff for a policy recommendation, committee hearing, and or sub-forum conversation, generating a recommendation, and then we take for action. I think that this item is ready for the committee polishing. Is there a committee that would be interested in hearing this? My thought is that the government's finance and administration committee, which is this one, friends, should provide feedback on our behalf, unless there is a sub-forum that's interested in that is not.
One thing I'd add is probably should be, we have to do that, prepare the action before.
Sure. A roll-up, I mean, a summary of, okay. Yeah, we can. Yes, that's for everyone.
Would the committee be interested in having a discussion about this item, or is it ready for action? Next month meeting.
For the next meeting.
What we can do is at the next meeting, take action on this recommendation. Now that it's both public, stakeholders have seen it, we have a chance to hear the pitch.
Yeah.
So if I think the committee wants to hear it and in more depth, tease out some items, that would be appropriate.
I think it could be consideration for action next. We will. Now that it's made public. Folks want to speak to it.
Okay, that's all we'll do. Let's move on to item C, draft emergency relocation policy. Same thing.
Sure.
Presentation for.
So HUD is in the business of typically publishing interim rules, and so us being like them, we decided to go ahead and put it in writing and take action on items, because it was in the previous severe weather event also led to some damage, particularly to one individual tenant. So we published it, and this is a subsequent draft, because actually we took out the word interim. Because now you're gonna consider it at some point for action. But again, the board gave us direction to develop policy. We're gonna start each policy with some sort of definition, which is what would be considered an emergency relocation or an emergency, I should say. And then again, we use TAA and TDACA in terms of what temporary relocation means. There is something called the Uniform Relocation Act, which doesn't apply in this case, so we just defer to TAA in this case about the temporary relocation. So with that, I'm going to actually go through this temporary relocation because I think it's important. So the idea is that the tenants could potentially relocate within the unit. You know, it came to my attention last month that you were able to relocate temporarily in cases of emergency. Obviously, it's still subject to city's approval, and in this case, we did have to get city approval of the unit that we're actually being transferred to because of our current situation. But you could potentially be relocated within the facility temporarily, and if that's the tenant's choice, and we were able to accommodate them, obviously, maybe we would do that. If the units are 100% occupied, obviously there's no place for them to move to, but fortunately or unfortunately, that's not our case. So we have vacancies. So in the case of the one individual family, we were able to relocate them on site, or we would relocate them off site in an area in a location that would be appropriate. Ideally, following generally the rules of Uniform Relocation Act, but ideally, within reasonable vicinity of the facility to the extent that we can. But that would be something we would be discussing with the individual that would accommodate their needs, be it physical or familiar size or whatever the case might be. So again, in cases where things aren't specifically flushed out here, we would just defer to CAA, and they have a long litany of verbiage related to temporary housing and what that looks like. So it didn't make sense to necessarily spell all those out per se. Okay, so parameters in the event of emergency, we talked about them being relocated, and then there are items being stored, obviously. If they opt to relocate, then we would obviously incur the expense of relocating their items until such time where they're able to relocate back to the appropriate facility. And then the next is reimbursement. So we encourage all the property owners to seek renters insurance, which has become more and more reasonable, as we know, and actually Foundation Communities has actually a good program related to renters insurance. So that'll be something good for the future as it relates to Rosemont, at least in this case. But the thought is that we would pay the amount toward the deductible, and whatever excess would be going directly to the property owner. In the case where the property owner did not elect to have insurance, then we would assess the value of the properties, and we would give up to $1,000 towards that. But I would strongly say we going forward as an organization, we want to try to figure out ways to really get folks to have renters insurance if we can, because it makes good sense. And again, what we try to do is sort of encourage that through this by again saying pay the deductible and whatever excess, but we want to continue to encourage that as a function. So concessions. So as it relates to risk concessions, the goal would be is to use a standard rate, which we use GSA oftentimes for reimbursements or mileage and the like. So we said we would obviously look at the time of the event occurred and obviously provide the individual credit for that period of time related to when their inconvenience or when their unit wasn't in an acceptable form, and establish that and make sure that the resident is aware of such. So we've actually done that, and we do have a form that we fill out. We were going to show you an example of one that was completed recently. So per diem, essentially, we would do per diem as well, which is also a DSA rate, and then If they were offsite, obviously, we would address the issue of mileage as well. I'm sorry, let me try to get through this. So, we created a forum, you know, to probably help expedite the process. And then we would obviously review this at a minimum annually or as necessary, giving feedback that we get each time there's an event. That might be the time to review the forum, but at a minimum, we would do this annually as we do all the policies and such. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Go ahead, sir.
uh,
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Are there any immediate clarifying questions or suggestions? There is a sub-forum assembled on this now that it's been made public. We've had a preliminary discussion, the next step in our policy development is for that sub-forum to finalize any changes, integrate changes from other members, and we'll take action on it at the next meeting.
So let me interject.
Yes, sir.
If you don't mind.
Of course.
You're gonna pay a person or pay $1,000 deductible. Insurance runs about $15 or less than 20. I think you have it on the average standard small place. And so I would, as opposed to paying that $1,000 directly, to set up some kind of fund to fund the insurance and pay the insurance for those individuals that can't afford insurance. So that may be a better option than to pay an individual, because you got loss of contents and all that stuff in there.
Yeah, let me just say this, I'm not a renter right now, but I was. Renters insurance also still has a deductible. And but obviously be up to the committee or some forum to decide. Even if you have insurance, you do have to pay a deductible, and it typically, obviously, it ranges depending on how the value you're wearing, but they typically range anywhere from $250 to $1,000 or $750. So there is some may see it as cost. The idea of paying for insurance is cost effective, but the idea of paying the deductible maybe not. But I mean, that would be something that the subquorum can sort of flush out. But our thought was, I mean, our current state is that have many who do not have insurance. So we obviously could think about it and project forward and try to figure out the best way to handle it. But we certainly, that was just one approach to doing that. But, you know, folks aren't going to be required. If they aren't required, there may be the possibility they don't have it. So obviously that would be a board decision of how they really want to move forward with it. But there is always a deductible related to renters.
Yeah, and I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
License agent for 20 years. So,
Yeah.
But the point I'm getting, you know, if you get the basic 250,
Yeah.
and if a person can't pay it at that time, you can add $2 a month to their bill and
Sure.
pay it out over the course of a year or something. So but
Yeah,
have the funds there to do it, to take care of it.
I agree. I agree
And keep
that.
it at the lowest possible rate as opposed to writing $1,000 check.
I think that's a really worthwhile idea for us to consider, and I would be so grateful if you could put it in writing so we could tease it out and be responsive to the different pieces of it.
And I just threw it out as a suggestion.
I think it's a very important, I think it's a very important suggestion. And so, for the benefit of our process, at least because for me, it's hard for me to remember things sometimes. If you could put it in writing, the suggestion, so that the subforum can process it, I think that would be very beneficial. I think I understand what you're saying. And I think it is important. And so I would want us to think about it and analyze it before we come back for action. Are there any additional recommendations or questions before we move on?
Well, just clarifying that, so I also use, so, that would really be helpful to massive numbers of tenants, and, we know that inclement weather events are not over, and they're gonna keep happening, and damage to property, personal property of renters is gonna continue to happen, so I think it'd be extremely proactive of us to, say something along the lines of, be to your words. And it isn't just about Rosemont, because we have.
No, not at all.
So it would be very interesting to put this in place, something gained as a result of the bad experience. Property that puts us in a better position for the future, and remaining in a better position for the future.
My expectation is that we will get your written feedback. The sub forum will come up with some recommendations for action. And I'm hopeful that we may be able to bring something that would be consensus and exciting for the full board direction by March. That's my hope. I'm not committing to it, unlike the inclement weather. Ready? Let's move to number D, status of concerts bill fix, and I want to be real with you all. This one is really complicated and hard for me to figure out how we're gonna fix it, so I hope we will all be creative and really be present for it. Mr. Howard, why don't you start with your perception of what we need to do, because
Sure.
it's a tricky one, okay?
Yeah, and I'm gonna start with Ms. Combs, by the way. That issue was resolved. At least I got an email saying that it was resolved and they got a credit, so I'm not sure as of the time when that happened, but I did get an email. I asked about it and I saw an email saying that she was credited. But I'm gonna say this, I think the issue probably, and I'm actually gonna let Mr. Ward talk about this a little bit. Conservice that we use, Conservices use, obviously in this case, to allow for work to be performed with the utilities needing to be on, obviously, typically when the resident's actually out of the unit. In some cases, folks aren't always, sometimes they, maybe there's a lap or overlap of utilities being turned back into the name of the resident, back to the resident's name. And so someone may be back in the unit and they may still be getting a bill. Now, I'm gonna stop right there. I'll probably let Dally could explain what may have been led to this. So we do have an explanation, but since he is here, I'm gonna let him speak to it just a bit.
Good morning, everybody. So Conservice, third-party utility billing company, they pay all of the utilities for Rosemont. So when we took over, we gathered up all the utility bills, sent them over to Conservice. They started actively paying water, sewer, electric. And electric, the way that works is we're on a landlord standby with them. So early on, I think Robert signed the POA, which you have to have the utility company. And when a bill, or let's just say when a meter, not necessarily a bill, when a meter is going to be turned off, instead of it being turned off, it automatically rolls into the property's name. Now that can be for a variety of reasons, including somebody's moved out and they tell the utility provider, I'm no longer here. So instead of that being shut off, it rolls over in our name. We start getting billed for it so that the power stays on to that unit. Other ways that can happen is for non-payment. So if non-payment criteria is met and that meter is about to be turned off, instead of it being turned off, it rolls over into the property's name. We watch for vacant and non-vacant units. If it's an occupied unit and somebody is shown as living there and the meter's on, it starts creating a bill into that person's name, hits their ledger, and they receive that bill so that they're still having to make that utility payment. So, and then if somebody moves in and never turns it on in their name, they still get the bill for the utility usage that was done in there. Hopefully that kind of provides a little more clarity.
Did you see that last scenario? one more
Yeah,
time?
so let's just say somebody moves in and
Yeah.
they're supposed to turn the utilities on in their name, but they never do. We're still getting the bill for it. It will show on the Conservice report and they'll actively bill the person back for the usage.
Did you hear the Tenant Association representation of the issue, which is basically some people have charges they should, if some rising, as best as I can understand the mechanics here.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's tough for me to understand how it happened. And again, there's different scenarios. I don't want to say that the young lady that never moved out, either one, never maybe had it in her name, or two, and look, everybody makes mistakes, including Conservice. So could it be that somewhere some wires got crossed and they believed that that unit was somehow getting a different, bill or something like that. Now, I got the same deal Patrick did, we realized, went through, we corrected that. So I don't 100% know how that happened, but it did. I believe we've made the correction. On anyone else that we find, we'll make those, similar corrections, but generally it's a pretty seamless transition.
So I'm just gonna, from my perspective of what I saw, as well as, in most cases, if there is an issue, then it's an error, not the system, that the system isn't broken, it's operator error in terms of not appropriately billing the individual, so it has to get corrected, and then the property management has to go in and manually correct it. And I think that's what has to happen in those cases. So there's probably not a system change that needs to occur, and there needs to be maybe more expeditious attention paid to cases where the bill's not being corrected to reflect what it should be. So I think that's what at least from talking to the regional manager, who's since made those physical corrections, these billings are, mistakes, and not necessarily, we need to replace the third-party system, as far as that's concerned. But my understanding of the last person that we discussed, that they've since given a credit, I don't know if that's been in the last day or so, but I was told that they did correct the deficiency that was on the, the one that was highlighted.
Ms. Garcia, just thank you for saying, are we understanding the challenge that and the pain point that tenants have correctly?
Yes, but what Patrick is saying is my belief 100%. I'm not saying get rid of controversy. I'm saying there's an error that is happening to multiple people over and over again, and you all say that you'll fix it, and you don't. And April, 1 hour ago, got fixed. 1 hour ago, I just got that email. She's been saying this for a month. And so right before this meeting, that's when things usually happen, right? It got fixed. Besides April, Jennifer De La Garza, also never moved out. Same, she received bills from Conservice, it went to a creditor. I have examples of at least 5 more people that it's not the story that they're saying, like this is the way that it's supposed to work, but Keisha was not living in her apartment when she got a Conservice bill. When she moved back in, she turned it back into her name, but that bill still existed. And I have other examples of that. We've shown it to Patrick, we've shown it to the managers. It doesn't get fixed, and that's what we're asking for. I think it's a simple fix, it's just not happening.
So, just clarifying on what you've already stated, Mr. Mark, who is the point person on staff for hiring errors in this case like this, if there's a billing?
Our staff or property management staff? Because what happens is,
if they're not getting relief through Capstone, on these double billing situations.
they should contact myself or Mr. Hoffbauer. Yes.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, when we are aware of problems, we pass it back to the property management company with an expectation that it'll be turned around. And that's what happens. And so I was asked to look into the Conservice bill. They made me aware of those that were out of compliance, and they said that they had addressed those. I've not gone into the system myself. I don't work. So there is that expectation.
That's wrong.
And I think we all see the problem. I think the issue is, in my opinion, is that there needs to be reporting and checking and auditing that process.
Okay.
If we do, if you get it up to you, it needs to be fixed as soon as possible.
Sure.
That's where it's just.
Yes.
It's just we've had so many problems over the last 2 years,
Correct.
This is, 5 or 10 out of 380.
That's correct. So toward that end, we as a staff need to ensure that we are consistently, inquiring about the Conservice bill, and if it requires some sort of weekly roll up because this is an issue that seems to continue to raise its ugly head, then that's what we should, and we are prepared to do that. I honestly, to be honest with you, I mean, prior to last month, I wasn't aware that the conservative bill was still a lingering issue because it felt like it went away because we had not heard anything specifically about it, at least from my vantage point. So obviously the idea of fixing it was something that we had hopes would be resolved at this point. So we certainly, yeah, that's what I'm gonna confirm. That's
my recommendation on this is I will take one for the team, assign this to the real estate committee. So that I can report back to the full board on our progress, and I think everybody shares the same desired goal. It has reemerged because I think we are trying to tidy it up before a transition. I think everybody understands what that is. And this is one that is, I think, befuddling at times. I think it's useful to kind of try and have a conversation across the different entities involved, as painful as that might be. So barring further questions or clarifying comments, we'll deal with it at the committee level and come back with either a report saying fixed it or a necessary recommendation direction. That takes us to draft financial stabilization plan, which is one of the truly key substantive items for you today. There is nothing that we need to go into executive session for this presentation, but this is a preview for discussion regarding negotiated settlements. I'm not going to take that in until the end. I do believe we want to have that conversation in executive session. So, Mr. Howard, the key word here, right, is draft. This is not the financial stabilization plan. Outline an initial version of the financial stabilization plan. Some action items necessary. With that, go ahead, sir. Yeah.
sure. So the goal is to make sure we are financially solid and have the ability to dispose of the property in a timely fashion, as in Rosemont and Oak Valley. That requires us to obviously address all our outstanding debts related to the property and continue to operate, as an organization in terms of covering our day-to-day costs. So what we've done is just very simply showed our obligations in terms of, costs that we have that we're responsible for. So we are going on the estimate that we got in terms of the bid, 36 million. Well, actually the bid that we got offered was exactly what we owed. So interestingly enough, but so 36 million is what we are, our notes on the mortgage, mortgage. I mean, give or take, obviously it changes month to month, but this is rough. We have current outstanding obligations about 9 million. And then our operational administrative costs, I would say somewhere around 653,000, which totals about 45 million or so, almost 46. We have the bid offer that was received by us. We do have funds in the bank, and that shows our revenue, and we can continue to go down. Okay, so there's obviously a delta between what we owe and what money's been committed specifically for the purposes of Rosemont. So maybe can go back again and show you that. Obviously, it doesn't show what we have in the bank that's minus that. So we're showing the funds that we owe in terms of our obligations, and then obviously the commitment of the bid. So I think we go back. So how do we address the different sort of deficit? Well, obviously we would go into look at how to address the 1.1 plus 1.073 million. So two things we could do obviously is we do have anticipated cash flow, which we believe if things hold up to June, we would have enough to cover the costs associated with the gap. The other thing we potentially could do would be is to obviously look at selling our ownership interest in one of our partnerships, similar to what we did at City View at the park, which garnered us 2.6 million. And we do have some interest in some properties while we are, actually, our development partner in Creekview is interested in selling their interest, but we potentially could as well, and I don't want to get too in the weeds as far as what that looks like and how you do that. That may or may not necessarily meet the timeline, only because it sometimes takes a while, but there is a possibility. If we were elect to do that, one of the things we could do is borrow the money from our strategic partner, Travis County Facilities Corporation, obviously with subject to the housing authority approving it. So we have two housing authority board members here today as well. But we could borrow that money if we elected to do that and pay the agency back when those funds came in, or we could bank on the proceeds that we're likely to get. Now, let me just say what happens is developers, we do, for the budget you all approved in December, they provide a projection of what we should receive in revenue, and that's typically based on either excess cash, and the supervisor will correct me here, cash or whatever the deal structure afforded us in terms of funds each year. So we get gross excess of what, $5 million a year just from the existing deals that we have, at least currently. So first quarter, we're estimating about $3 million that's due to us. That number that has been moving a little bit to the right, quite frankly, just because there's some outstanding things that have happened. But we do believe we'll at least have enough to cover the cost that we expect with the gap. So our option would be one, again, to utilize our existing cash flow that we anticipate coming in along with the money that we obviously have in the bank, or to do the same, or to, again, sell our ownership interest in one of the properties that we have. And if those funds were to come in prior to, then there would be no issue. If we don't anticipate coming through, we feel strongly we could probably borrow money from our partner and pay them back. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, obviously we can talk about more, but we do believe that we have the wherewithal in order to address the needs. That's the long and short of the presentation.
This is a critical item, so I would really like to get a sense of each board member of their preferred option or sort of key direction. Mr. Robertson, this is a high priority. Very eager to hear your initial reaction.
Well, my concern is, if this meets the necessary obligations, but my concern is, like this gentleman here, just sitting on $1 million or so dollars that's got to be paid. We need to be paying that off now. Look at the time value of money. It's going to increase. So we need to look at those outstanding bills and let's clear up some of this stuff and not wait until we get ready to come up with that.
And
Go ahead, Mr. Robertson.
And we were doing that. I mean, in this case in point, we have it. We just settled with the entity, just yesterday? We got the settlement statement.
Yes.
Okay. So we are working through that, and we wanted to talk to the board today just to let you know our plan. But yes, we are working on addressing those. We're working on addressing those outstanding debts and liens.
I didn't hear which one settled.
I didn't say.
Oh, I
We'll discuss that in the.
I didn't say which one.
So, but that's the point, and getting this thing tied down
Sure.
quickly, because, June, it is now targeted at June, and if you're dealing with the city and everything, it may wind up being September. So instead of a $9 million deficit, we could be in the $10 million or 11 million. So it keeps going up every month. It's
Correct.
$653,000.
That's correct, and we're aware of that. As far as those that are solely falling squarely within our purview to address, that we have a good handle on what those are. We want to let the board know. Obviously, there's downsides to obviously paying off all of the debt. Obviously, that means your resources are not what they were, but we wanted to make you aware of that, and we will move forward as directed to make sure we take care of those. But I want to make you aware that we have sufficient funds, likely barring the delta, to be able to address those, and we will move forward with those. But obviously, the downside is obviously what we have.
And finally, the only thing I have left on that is the fact that, you know, we are still in the winter months. We've got at least another month and a half before, and we could wind up incurring additional expenses. So, but hopefully we've learned from the last three that we can get through this without any additional expenses. And that's my only concern. You hold on to an old car that needs fixing, it starts costing you more and more and more, and at some time, you gotta cut your losses and move on.
You talking about my car? You were looking at me, I think.
Well, yeah, but
No,
you got a 2025.
I understand.
All right, any other, any reactions to the plan, any preferred options from the ones laid out, any alternative options that we think we should consider? This is a critical choice, and I do believe strongly we should officially let staff know what we are willing to defend in the community. So we need to be responsible board members and say, this is the direction we'd like to take, because all of them have trade-offs. So it's important that we start talking about it. It can be a little nightmare. Just to emphasize again, I would like us to take action at some point, as we're saying, this is the plan, and informing other parties that are relevant here. Some of which we may serve as cords up, that this is what we're doing. So sorry for that preamble there. Any preferences in terms of the strategies or alternatives you like?
Well, first, I can't really speak to the SHFC or similar boards, because for their willingness to do that, so that probably needs to be following the rules for discussion in that one. That would be helpful to have that as a business for that as an option. But I was perking up my ears around the discussion of settlements, because I wondered if that's part of the strategy as well, to look at settlements on some of it.
Yeah, we have a letter from the attorney about settlements, but just short, we don't have outstanding liens. We have the one that we had, we resolved that. But again, we're prepared to address the issues of outstanding debts, and we as an organization can do that currently right now. I mean, you know, the previous board obviously sort of delayed some of the action initially because of the intent or the hope that the insurance proceeds would address the need. Well, they did not, and obviously we were still sort of in flux. We didn't know what we were going to do last fall about all these issues, and so we're obviously in a better place now, and we can move forward. And so we've begun to do that with those outstanding obligations.
Do I understand that there's sort of factored in already to the figures you're giving?
Oh, absolutely. That not the number every, yeah, that the 9 million, if we can go back to that slide, at the previous sheet. So that 9 million that we're talking about includes those individuals that maybe have addressed the board today and about outstanding obligations.
And what's included in that factor is some percentage possibly of settlement, is that not factored into this amount?
You mean some negotiating?
Right.
Yes.
Any perspectives on which direction we want to take for financial stabilization? For instance,
My concern here is that I don't like operating in a place of scarcity, but I also like to think about what is the long-term plan here, because selling our interest or depleting the funds that we have available, it just seems like we're not aiming towards new projects anytime soon or anything like that. Like, I just worry that if we're cutting our interest, where are we planning to generate income from after we sell Rose?
Sure. So I can speak to that, and I might let Super share a little bit. So we get about $5 million a year from current existing projects. Right now, as of yesterday, we're working on a new project that will be coming forward, Soft Decker Lane, that we think will happen soon. The county will have it'll be seeking a resolution of no objection from Travis County. Let me just explain what that means. When you have a tax credit project, if it's in the city or the county, you have to get a resolution in order to move forward. So they have to seek that. That's on the 28th of this month. That goes forward, we will have a new project coming forward, which will net us, a few $1 million. So we are still in the business of working on projects. We didn't include that here as it relates to that because obviously we are opportunists and we continue to work on that, and we will continue to do that and obviously expand our ability to continue to do work. As it relates to where we are now, if we were to sell our ownership interest in one or more of the properties, which say if we don't, if we do, we will still net about $3.5 million each year, even with the existing projects that we were to sell our interest in one, and that's not including the ones that we continue to work on. But there's no guarantee with projects. I mean, if we could determine that landscape, we would, but I mean, projects come and there's other entities that can also do the same work that we're doing. So it really is just an opportunity. It's something that you can't necessarily control, but you do your best to try to seek those out. And we are working on that. And as I failed to mention those but we are seeking obviously to replenish the revenue in the event that we do sell. But even if the organization, I mean, when obviously no one wants their savings to go down, but even if we did, we would still, as an organization, from an administrative standpoint, be able to function for the next 2-3 years, regardless of whether we got any new projects or not. But that's not inherent within your mission is to continue to expand affordable housing options, and obviously that's what we still continue to do day to day.
It's been 3 years since we've had a project, right?
We closed the project early last year, but it was from the previous year. So it has been a while, and there's many things that contribute to that. Strategic Housing Finance Corporation wasn't necessarily the go-to organization to do tax credit developments probably a year ago, and we are still working through that. And you all can, as an organization, can talk about how we continue to improve our profile to be the preferred option for those entities to come to us. But that again is something that, yes, there is no ability to control that. Let me say the other thing that affected that as well is that the interest rates have been going up phenomenally. And if you watch what's happened with the bond review board, many projects were actually, those allocations were turned back in because folks couldn't make those deals work. So there wasn't a lot of development, new projects for any development entity like ours the last year or so. I mean, it's been very slow in that regard. But so things we're excited about the possibility of the one project with the hopes of having other, of course. But again, that's the nature of the business.
That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And well, I have some feedback on.
And we'll take philanthropic donations as well, but no one's been coming and asking.
Ms. Press, did you have any reaction to the benefits of additional spending? The real estate committee will take this item and with the feedback that you provided, try and come up with a consensus, a proposal for further demolition and hopefully eventually action. With that, I think we've,
One second.
yes,
Predating me on the board, I know you do have a history of selling properties at times and not in terms of this or concern as we're in right now. But what was the factors went into the sale? So to give in a moment, just in a shorthand.
Yeah, to be honest, full disclosure, the city was very interested in purchasing it. They wanted to put PSH housing on there. They wanted to upzone it to be able to develop it. And they approached us about selling it. At the time, we felt like the options were good for us as an organization. And it was during this period of uncertainty regarding our finances. So it did come at an appropriate time. We just closed on that December the 5th. So it's current history. I mean, it's fast, but it took a while because they also purchased the ownership. They purchased our ownership interest and the equity partner
And the equity
interest
partner.
as well, which is
Okay.
was
That's
complexity
fair
with
enough.
perspective.
It's good to know.
It took a while.
And was a property that wasn't cash flowing.
Yeah, that's correct. That's the other point. It wasn't really cash flowing for us. It's an older building. Yes, I'm sure you do. So, I mean, you know, it's obviously been around for quite a while, but it wasn't cash flowing as well. And, but the city did approach us about it. Yeah.
Are we ready for next item? I'm gonna try and make up some time here, since we're a little bit behind. On the board president report, I just wanted to provide a few brief updates on a few items. As you know, on the message board, I posted the draft work plan at some point, and we really enough feedback as a board. I think we should adopt sort of the things that we want to do. One of the items is following a recommendation that I thought was very thoughtful from Mr. Howard, is adopting a policy resolution on our strategic focus. And that will address sort of what are we going to be in the business of moving forward. Obviously, we are still to do bonds and tax credits for the time being. Part of it is understanding where we fit in the overall county picture. On item B, and I think you're seeing this in this meeting, and it will be the procedure we follow. They'll try and always have a first and a second reading style deliberation approach. That means that we hear a policy item or report it. Think that we need to take action first, but then in a subsequent meeting, we take action. We are not making any formal changes right now to our bylaws. I will put it in the draft manual that you will get a chance to approve. We'll see once the remaining board member joins us if it's working, and if we want to formalize it. The board manual, I am kind of adding all of the things that we are doing and figuring out. I've heard some suggestions of things that we need on there, including etiquette, that I am researching. You will see it sometime in the next couple of months as a complete document. And we will hopefully adopt it. It's a way of kind of sharing practices for folks that come on ourselves so that we have some established routine. At this point, I'm going to read our committee assignments into the record. I am really grateful that sort of different folks with this allowed for everybody's explicit requests to be fulfilled. Here are the committee assignments, reading them into the record. These are the committees that will be functioning on the duties that I have assigned to those committees, and in accordance with previous standing committee votes by this body. These committee assignments do not preclude the forming of issue by issue subforums whenever the relevant board members do. On governance, finance, and administration, Prince is the chair, Winning is the other member. On human resources committee, Winning is the designated chair, and Prince is the other committee member. On real estate development committee, myself, Rio says the other is the chair, and Stream is the other member. One of the things that this allows is the new individual that's going to be joining our board really soon will be able to ask to be on any of these committees and still be in accordance with their subforum. If at that time, folks also want to revisit their requests and assignments, I think that would be an appropriate time and it would be considered to be. This concludes the President's Reports Update section. We are now going to move on to Executive Vice President's Reports. And again, with the theme of trying to be time efficient, assume that we have reviewed the documents. Just give us a brief overview and let us ask questions that may be of importance. The first one is Rosemont Property Management Update. And I know that we will want to cover mailboxes in this one. It's also the one that I expected to take the most time.
Yeah, and if I just might ask one question about the separate committees, would you like the staff to organize the committee meetings, or are you all comfortable doing those on your own?
So I think what will happen is the committee chair will say when there is a subforum meeting that does not require your time, your valuable time, because sometimes we just need to get.
Sure, that's fine, yeah.
And there are times where it is to provide or discuss with staff a specific item. So I think in the board manual and the process, I think we should follow these for the next 6 months. trying it out is, let's allow the committees, and particularly the chairs, to say, we need a staff power discussion,
Okay,
or we are just waiting by ourselves to come up with a recommendation and work on something that the board says to work on.
okay. And if I could just get confirmation, once those are done in terms of the policies, make sure that the final version of whatever that looks like, we're just clear on it, so we don't have multiple versions floating around. So that would come from the committee chair, or would it come from you?
So as you know, the committee reports have to come from the chair, and my view is that the committee will, when necessary with you all, come up with the language we'll be taking action on. On some items, the committee itself will provide us the language.
Okay.
But I think one of the things that's important is, since we're all here, it is important that we provide the items for action, draft in their text form, that we expect to be publicly noticed, and that the public will be able to have access to and read in a timely fashion. Ms. Reeves and I will continue to, for our bylaws, work with staff to set the agenda, and obviously reviewing the quality of items for action is something that we both care a lot about. So I think that the turnaround, would it be possible that we would have multiple items? We will all work to prevent anything. With that said, Executive Vice President reports, we are starting with Rose on property management updates.
Okay, so I'm. Thought it was a draft. Okay, so essentially, you all saw something in November, and I thought it was actually a pie chart, but we, these are the this is just a summary of the code violations. And I'm just going to summarize because this is information. I mean, we're feverishly working on continuing to try to address the violations. We obviously have a third-party person who is working with city code compliance to move that process along. And I think to date we have 77. I'm not sure why this one doesn't show that.
These are
70.
work orders.
Oh, those are work orders. I'm sorry. I'm talking and looking at the wrong thing. So those are work orders. I'm sorry. The code compliance violations were down to 77. But if you did you want to speak to the work orders?
So
Sorry.
the code compliance is on here. So where you see that carried forward of 157 forward. So those are
yeah.
some larger
Sorry.
items attached to that. In the month of January, we received 95 requests. Those aren't all necessarily from individuals living there. It can be a combination of any other code compliance things, but we put all those in the system just so that we have a way of tracking through it. We carried over 157. We completed 121, which did include some code compliance issues. So we have 131 outstanding, and that kind of tells you the amount that, percentage that we completed. But, a lot of the ones that we're carrying over, our priority is obviously on the residents, and any resident one that comes in, we're actively trying to work on those. Code, we're kind of a combination of working with third-party construction groups on some of the requirements and doing some of them in-house. So most of the ones we're carrying forward are larger projects.
Okay.
So do you have any questions on the data presented? This is the appropriate time to talk about mailboxes. Thank you for sharing this data. We've got to track it. One of the things that is always of importance to me is sort of seeing how long the average work order is open. It's been an unusual period, and so we will have to keep paying attention to it. I am curious to hear kind of what folks want to say about the buses.
In general, first comment, is this also data that's being captured and provided to our buyer? Because I know condition of the property is a big issue in speeding up.
They are asking those questions, yes, as part of their due diligence.
So this data is available. Or some, do you have some other, is there a way that you are providing them?
I mean, yes, as requested, there's been data provided. I mean, they coordinated with me about questions that are being asked of us, and then we're providing that to them. So in most cases, there's been direct contact. Whenever there's contact made by the buyer, I'll be made aware of and whatever that is that they're asking for. And then they would get my approval to go forward. We just signed an agreement just the other day about the inspections and the like, so.
That's my second question. Your earlier cost.
They just ask us for, to kind of have a building by building assignment that was provided to us. We provided the manpower that they asked for to make sure that there's walking teams with each one of their walking teams. As far as what they're collecting, I don't think that's being shared back to us. It might be.
No, not necessarily with us either. I mean, again, they will, whatever information they ask for, then I have to approve that collected.
Typically, in a due diligence process, the information that they're collecting is to go back to their team to determine how they're gonna move forward. So once they share that, they probably won't share that with our team until they're ready to go to finish their evaluation, and then they're ready to come up with the sales agreement.
That's correct.
Exactly. So I'm just wondering, where the markers are along the way and just in general, that be allowed and,
Yeah, I mean,
facilitate any way possible.
yeah, there's no issue related to the flow of information,
Okay, so.
at least from my vantage point.
And other questions, just trying to get clear on, it's like, again, this issue may have predated, on the board, that there's only from another colleague here that has been going on before, as well as from the community saying, you're not in your head, do you have like an idea of how we're gonna sort all those out?
One of the things that we discussed, and are moving forward with is, doing a redesign for the mailbox, center. And given the feedback that we've received over time from the residents, about having the boxes outdoors, and the vandalism that occurred outdoors. I went in and took a look at the space available in the leasing office, the leasing office, and identified space in there that we could create a mail room indoors, climate control with cameras. There would be one door entry into that room that would not give access to any other part of the leasing office. It would be an entry, it will be an entry from the outdoor. It'll either be operated by a punch code or a key card. The framing for the walls of that has pretty much been done. But we're waiting on a permit approval to be able to get the rest of the construction done.
So when we can start, is this based on the earlier issues or the round that we just heard from?
No, this is based on earlier, this is based on earlier issues.
Okay.
So maybe a history of the mailboxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Would
we
be helpful
probably.
there. So
So the permit was asked to be pulled.
It's been a little over 30 days, and it's taking the city of Austin a long time to approve permits right now. But we are checking on that regularly.
So
And go ahead.
right after the storm, when we arrived, Strategic had just paid for and put in new mailboxes outside at about $12,000. Those lasted about 2 weeks before they were completely tore up beyond being able to be usable again. So one of the first things that we engaged in when we got there was ordering new mailboxes. It takes about 60 days for mailboxes to be created with the numbers and everything that are appropriate for the United States Postal Service to sign off on them. Those mailboxes came in, unfortunately, had the wrong numbering on them. We had to send them back. They gave us priority, got us back a set. I think we're about 30 days after that. So the residents went about 90 days during that time frame without mailboxes. in an effort to keep them from being readily accessible to be broken into again, which is what happened, prior when they were outside, it was agreed on by the board at that time to put them inside the leasing office and to secure them as best that we could on basically coming in at 8 o'clock, it gets opened, and we've had different times throughout this session, but I think currently the security company locks the doors back at 10 o'clock. So they're widely accessible from 8 in the morning until 10. Not saying there's not some issues there, but that's what we're trying to get accomplished. We did watch footage. There's cameras in there, so this isn't a controlled environment. It's, we do have cameras. It's clear to see the gentleman break into these. He did enter the building earlier on in the day, went to the back, put some tape over the latches of one of the doors that didn't allow for it to be adequately locked, accessed that after hours, went back in there and tore the back parts off of all the mailboxes. You just heard Keith on what our long-term goal has been for quite a while to resecure these back in the leasing office. The leasing office in the beginning was not a priority to be rebuilt. We were trying to rebuild, apartments. So the mail was in there. We didn't really have a plan in place for a long time to rebuild the leasing center. When we did, this was one of the steps that we wanted to take, is to create this mail room. And then since we kind of prioritized it, we got hit with kind of waiting on permits to finalize the lease. So that's a little bit of the history of the mail.
So the difference between what would happen in a permanent facility where it was affixed to the wall versus the current scenario where the mailboxes are currently placed, what is the difference in terms of what it would look like?
Well, they wouldn't have access to the back of them, which is where they
Correct.
broke in this time around. And the front does provide a little more security than the back does, as far as being able to use a crowbar, which we always used to break into these this time around.
Let me ask a question also. What is the difference between that and what was happening when they were breaking in the mailboxes when they were outside?
When they're outside, there was no protection at all, and they were just using the crowbar to pry the front of them open and gaining access to the front.
As in there was no cameras,
There were no cameras out.
but the design of the mailbox would still be the same. It would just be that it's in a more controlled environment.
Yeah, the main difference between what we have right now is anybody right now can walk in, because we don't have a door that's kind of secured by a end pad or anything on the front. And that's what he did. He went in, went to the back, found a way of maneuvering a door where it couldn't be locked correctly, left, waited for it to be locked, went back after hours and got into them. In the new proposal, there would be some kind of security code access where the residents would have the code. Not to say that somebody wouldn't still get access to that code, or a fob, or, we're planning on doing something that would make it a little more difficult to enter that room if you're not arrested.
And I thought we did have a code, but folks were remembering the code, so we removed it.
Yes.
So there was a code initially when they stepped.
How long ago was that?
We had a quick set lock on there, and we had put in a code where that was kind of our hope. It was never very effective.
Yeah, so that was the timeline.
Yeah, I don't really remember. Maybe 60 days we tried it, kind of failed on this.
We are at our time target, so I want to be mindful, but we also want to have a discussion of executive session. Mailboxes are important and difficult challenge. I would be interested in hearing sort of if there is something that needs board wants to prepare action on, or any level work that we want to do.
Let's start with, it is important, and people are losing benefits under the more secured box. So that part of I'm going for the rest of the meeting.
So in the time remaining, what would we like to in an organized way do the mailboxes? Unless people have a specific action they want to provide. One of the things is there is as Jeff Pierce suggested, there's a remodel that's been in the works. I believe the remodel did get feedback from the tenants. This Pierce, is that correct? Is that correct? But the remodel.
I was going from the feedback that I had been getting for some time about the mailbox from different residents.
My perception was that last August, we had a conversation about what the model to look like that includes tenants. You don't feel there's been a structured conversation about it?
I'm happy to hold one. I'm not sure how much there is to do about the mailboxes. I'm more than happy to take feedback from the residents, and I understand the value of that.
Well,
I
well,
think
let me-
that we're
in the interest
doing
of
about
time.
all we can.
Yeah, let me just
In the
ask,
interest of time,
can we just get back to one of the committees to talk about it in a little deeper fashion? I mean, I guess the question is, I mean, this won't be an immediate fix regardless of what the design is. So if we're looking for some recommendation, if there is a thought about how to address the immediate need, that might be, there may be a two-step process, because we're talking about a building permit, and we're talking about 60 to 90 days before anything transpires related to the work being performed. So I don't want to give anybody an indication that this fix will resolve this problem in any immediate fashion. What I do want you all to know is right now that the mail is being held at the post office, and we're trying to reaffirm with the postmaster, that understanding, because obviously this happens all over, and there is, at one period, they were holding it for a long period of time, and because folks were, readily picking the mail up, they at some point just stopped holding the mail and started delivering it again. So that's what's happening currently because of the security issue of the mailbox not being operable. We obviously are having it held. So I didn't know if there was an immediate thought about it, what we should do as we talk about this long-term plan.
So one last time, any immediate prescriptive feedback we want to provide from DS? Any board members interested in leading an effort to find a solution that is both short-term or long-term on the mailbox? If not, we can move on, and it can be, I'll go out on the message board or over email. It's just, this is our opportunity. We've got the people in the room to provide some direction.
We just get some updates across, broadly from the chief, as the current process underway. If there are any results or traction made, not to repeat what we're already doing. And yeah, I'm stumped as to what we could do, but if you would give us any breakthroughs that you hear about, or how close we are to actually.
Yes, ma'am. I'll be happy to provide additional information.
I'm going to make a leadership decision, and we are in the interest of time going to skip B, C, and D. Reports. B and C in the board reports, and maybe I missed it, we're a little light this time. D, the same as always. And so if anybody has any questions that are pertinent to these reports, please do it over email, CC the appropriate other directors. We will have much more time to double March. That concludes all of our posted business with the exception of item F under discussion item, which is a discussion regarding negotiating settlements, and because that is covered under 551-071 consulting with an attorney, I am asked that we go into executive session. For the members of the public here, that means that you leave so we can talk about stuff that if we put out in public, it would leave the taxpayers in their thinking and vulnerable to that stuff. So that you all know, once we end executive sessions, we are going to my intent is to make a motion to adjourn the meeting, so there will be no other substantive discussion or business. With that said, would somebody make a motion to make it into executive session? Second, all those in favor?